November 1944. A single green beret changes hands between two British commandos crouched in a Norwegian fjord. Within hours, this absurdly simple act will force elite Wehrmacht observers to fire 150 rounds at positions that haven't been occupied for 20 minutes. But this wasn't luck. It was the culmination of a psychological warfare doctrine so effective that German intelligence would spend months trying to decipher what they called the Phantom Regiment phenomenon. And what they never understood. The British had weaponized their own reputation for eccentricity. 0347 hours, 12 November 1944. Surfjord, Norway, temperature 4 degrees. The smell of diesel and seaweed hung over HMS Vigilant as Lieutenant James Thornton pressed binoculars to his face, studying the cliffs that had already killed 17 of his men. The Norwegian coastline was a sniper's paradise. Every crevice, every boulder, every shadow could conceal a Mauser K98K with a Zeiss scope capable of killing at 800 meters, and the Germans had learned to use them with devastating precision. "Third one this week, sir." Sergeant William Davies stood beside Thornton, his Northumberland accent thick with frustration. Private Henderson, clean shot through the neck whilst he was fixing communications wire, didn't even see where it came from. The statistics were becoming unbearable. Since Operation Apostle, the Allied campaign to liberate northern Norway, had commenced in October, British and Norwegian forces had suffered a 23% casualty rate before ever engaging in direct combat. Wehrmacht mountain troops, dug into positions they'd fortified for 4 years, were picking off Allied personnel with methodical efficiency. Every supply run, every reconnaissance patrol, every attempt to establish forward observation posts resulted in body bags. The strategic situation was straightforward, but brutal. Germany's northern forces, cut off from retreat after Finland's September armistice with the Soviets, were conducting a scorched earth withdrawal through Norway's Finnmark region. British Commando units, specifically 30 Assault Unit and elements of 3 Commando Brigade, were tasked with harassing this withdrawal, gathering intelligence on German defensive positions and preparing the ground for Norwegian liberation forces. But the terrain made every mission a nightmare. Norwegian fjords created natural bottlenecks where Allied forces had to expose themselves, whilst German observers enjoyed elevated positions with clear sightlines. British commanders had tried conventional solutions. Smoke screens dissolved in the Arctic wind. Artillery barrages were ineffective against dispersed sniper positions carved into rock. Even RAF reconnaissance flights struggled with the weather and provided little actionable intelligence about individual sniper nests. Thornton himself, 28 years old, Sheffield-born, a civil engineer before the war, had proposed 5 different tactical approaches to his commanding officer, all rejected. "We can't waste ammunition suppressing positions we can't confirm," Colonel Hastings had said, his exhaustion evident. "We can't waste time on elaborate flanking maneuvers when the enemy's already withdrawing northward. And we certainly can't waste more lives on frontal approaches." But the deaths continued. Corporal Matthews, shot whilst retrieving water from a stream. Gunner Price, killed whilst establishing a mortar position. Lance Corporal Jenkins, hit while simply standing to stretch after 4 hours of immobility. The snipers were so effective that British forces were becoming paralyzed by caution. Movement slowed to a crawl, missions aborted, morale deteriorating. The Germans understood psychology. Every shot wasn't just a casualty, it was a message. "We see you. We control this ground. Your technology means nothing here." Wehrmacht mountain troops, many veterans of the Eastern Front, had perfected techniques for camouflage, patience, and selective targeting. They aimed for communications specialists, officers, and medics, high-value targets whose deaths disrupted operations beyond simple numbers. On 8th November, during a briefing in the cramped wardroom of Vigilant, Thornton had watched intelligence officer Captain Peter Halloran present the grim mathematics: 17 killed, 32 wounded in 12 days. The Germans are achieving a 4.1 effectiveness ratio compared to conventional engagement. At this rate, we'll lose effective fighting strength before we've advanced 50 kilometers inland. What about counter-sniper teams? Someone asked. Tried. The enemy positions are too well concealed. By the time our snipers identify their location, they've displaced. And frankly, they're better at this than we are. They've had 4 years to prepare these positions. Thornton had sat in silence, turning the problem over in his mind. The German advantage wasn't just marksmanship, it was information. They knew exactly when and where British forces were positioned because movement was impossible to conceal. But what if that information could be manipulated? What if the Germans' very effectiveness could be turned into a vulnerability? The idea came to him during a cigarette break on deck, watching 2 commandos swap berets because one had developed a tier. Green berets, the distinctive headgear of commando units, visible at considerable distance. To German observers, that splash of green meant high-value target. Officers and specialists wore them, veterans wore them, men whose deaths would hurt. Davies, Thornton had said slowly, what if we gave them targets they couldn't resist? And what if none of those targets were actually there? The sergeant had looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Sir? Psychological warfare, Sergeant. Not for them, against them. We make them waste ammunition, reveal positions, and exhaust themselves shooting at ghosts. What followed was 3 days of frantic preparation that would violate every standard tactical doctrine, because the solution Thornton proposed was absurd. Deliberately create the appearance of high-value targets, move them constantly, and force German snipers to reveal their positions by firing at decoys. The bureaucracy resisted. It was ungentlemanly, wasteful, unproven. But Colonel Hastings, desperate and watching his force bleed, gave provisional approval for one trial operation. By 11 November, Thornton had assembled a team of 12 commandos willing to implement what they privately called the Beret Ballet. The objective, establish a forward observation post near Surfjord whilst simultaneously conducting the most elaborate shell game ever attempted under enemy fire. The mission would begin in 36 hours. If it failed, more men would die. If it succeeded, they might finally turn the tables on an enemy who'd enjoyed 4 years of untouchable superiority. 05:23 hours, 13th November 1944, forward staging area, 3 kilometers south of Surfjord. The Norwegian dawn was still 2 hours away when Thornton's team moved into position. Temperature had dropped to 7 degrees and thin ice was forming on exposed metal equipment. Each commando carried 60 pounds of gear, Lee Enfield rifles, ammunition, rations, communications equipment, medical supplies, and, crucially, 4 extra green berets per man, stuffed with newspaper and mounted on collapsible wooden frames that could be raised above trenches or rocks. Daftest thing I've ever done, sir, and I once volunteered to defuse a mine in my underwear because my uniform was soaked, muttered Private Tommy Foster, a Londoner whose dark humour had kept spirits up since Normandy. But his hands moved with practiced efficiency, assembling the decoy frames in darkness, guided purely by touch. The plan was brutally simple and completely mad. The team would establish positions in a line roughly 400 meters long, each position separated by 30-40 meters. Real commandos would occupy entrenched positions, deep enough to provide cover, camouflaged with native vegetation, chosen specifically for stone backing that would stop bullets. But throughout the mission, decoy berets would appear at exposed positions, mounted on frames, raised briefly above cover, moved laterally using ropes and pulleys, creating the illusion of commandos moving carelessly between positions. The Germans had established observation posts on the northern ridge, identified by previous reconnaissance as likely locations based on sight lines and elevation. Thornton's gamble was that German observers, trained to target British commandos on sight, would instinctively fire at any green beret that appeared. Each shot would create muzzle flash, reveal position, and allow British counter-sniper teams, positioned specifically for this purpose, to return fire with precision. But the conditions were brutally hostile to this plan. The Arctic wind was unpredictable, strong enough to knock decoys over, revealing the deception. Visibility was affected by fog rolling off the fjord, sometimes thick enough to obscure positions entirely, other times clearing unexpectedly. The rocky ground made digging difficult. Commandos used bayonets and entrenching tools against permafrost-hardened soil, their hands bleeding through gloves. German patrols were active. Twice during setup, Thornton's team had to freeze in place whilst Wehrmacht mountain troops moved past their positions, close enough to hear German conversations about rations and rotation schedules. Sergeant Davies coordinated the effort with characteristic Yorkshire pragmatism. If the Germans shoot our decoys, we win. If they shoot us, we've got the same problem we had yesterday. At least this way we're trying something. He moved between positions, checking angles, ensuring each decoy could be raised and lowered without exposing the operator, testing the rope systems that would create lateral movement. The human cost of preparation was immediate. Corporal Ian McGregor from Glasgow suffered severe frostbite in 3 fingers while setting up decoy mechanisms in exposed positions. "Can't feel them anymore, Sarge, but I can still pull a trigger," he'd said, refusing evacuation. Private Foster had taken a fall on icy rocks, badly bruising his ribs, but continued working because the mission was already underway. Communications specialist Lance Corporal David Hughes from Cardiff was setting up wireless equipment when the first test of the operation occurred. At 06:47 hours, with dawn beginning to grey the eastern sky, a German patrol appeared unexpectedly on the southern approach, 4 Wehrmacht soldiers conducting routine reconnaissance. The British team was partially exposed, equipment visible, decoys in various stages of assembly. Thornton made an instant decision. He raised one of the decoy berets, a green splash against grey stone, and moved it laterally, as if a careless commando were relocating. The effect was instantaneous. A shot cracked from the northern ridge, and the decoy frame exploded in splinters. The German patrol, startled by the sniper fire and unaware of British positions nearby, withdrew rapidly, assuming they'd stumbled into an active engagement zone. "Contact north, 850 meters, ridgeline, second outcropping from the west," Davies called immediately, his binoculars tracking the dissipating muzzle smoke. "Counter-sniper team, you have the position?" "Acquired," came the response from Corporal James Wright, whose sniper team had positioned themselves specifically to cover that sector. "Holding fire. No confirmation of target." The operation's first phase was working. The German sniper had revealed his position by firing at a decoy. But Thornton knew this was preliminary. The real test would come when German observers realized British forces were establishing positions and began systematic targeting. By 08:15 hours, the team was fully positioned. The rising sun, weak through cloud cover, provided enough light for German observers to see movement. Thornton initiated the Beret ballet, a carefully choreographed sequence where decoys appeared at different positions, in patterns designed to suggest active military operations, command personnel moving between positions, specialists establishing equipment, scouts conducting reconnaissance. The first German response came at 08:31. A shot struck the stone behind position 3, where a decoy had appeared momentarily. Then another shot targeting position 5. Then 3 rapid shots at position 1, where a decoy had been raised, moved laterally 3 meters, then lowered. "They're taking the bait," Hughes whispered into his wireless, logging each shot. 7 rounds fired, 3 positions revealed. But the Germans were also cautious. After the initial flurry, fire slowed. Observers were studying the situation, perhaps noticing that none of their targets had fallen, perhaps beginning to suspect something irregular. Thornton had anticipated this. The operation included scripted casualties. Commandos would raise decoys, wait for shots, then dramatically collapse the frames, whilst others threw equipment into view, creating the visual impression of men hit and positions abandoned. The psychological manipulation was multi-layered. German observers, trained to confirm kills, would see berets disappear after shots, apparent confirmation of effectiveness. But then, new berets would appear at nearby positions, suggesting reinforcement or repositioning. The pattern was designed to trigger frustration and increased fire, the human instinct to suppress targets that kept appearing. At 10:15 hours, the German fire intensified dramatically. Observers had apparently decided that British forces were establishing a major forward position and required aggressive suppression. Shots came in volleys. 6, 8, 12 rounds in rapid succession, targeting every decoy that appeared. Bullets struck stone, sent rock fragments flying, one round passing so close to Private Foster's actual position that he felt the supersonic crack. "Sir, they're burning through ammunition like it's a bloody fairground shooting gallery," Davies reported, simultaneously impressed and horrified by the intensity of fire. Estimate 45 rounds fired in the last 20 minutes, at least 6 distinct firing positions revealed. The counter-sniper teams were now engaging with precision. Each German muzzle flash provided a target, and British snipers, though acknowledging German superiority in this terrain, had the crucial advantage of knowing where to look. Corporal Wright's rifle cracked, followed seconds later by reports from other sniper teams. German fire began to slacken as observers found themselves under accurate return fire. By 1200 hours, the pattern was undeniable. German snipers had fired an estimated 89 rounds at positions that contained nothing but newspaper-stuffed berets on wooden frames. British casualties, 0. German positions revealed 9, with confirmed hits on at least 3. The operation was succeeding beyond initial projections, but it was also revealing something unexpected about German tactical doctrine. They were struggling to adapt, continuing to fire at targets even after patterns should have suggested deception. The chapter closed, with Thornton watching another German volley strike empty positions, his exhausted team maintaining the choreography despite cold fear and disbelief that the absurd plan was actually working. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "I think we've just proven that sometimes the most ridiculous idea is the only one the enemy won't expect." 14:30 hours. 30th of November 1944. Wehrmacht observation post. Adler 7, Northern Ridge. Hauptmann Klaus Brenner lowered his binoculars with hands that trembled, not from cold, but from mounting frustration that bordered on disbelief. For 6 hours, his spotters had been engaging British commandos in the southern sector, and the mathematics made no sense whatsoever. "Oberfeldwebel Krause, your count," he demanded, his Bavarian accent sharp with tension. The senior NCO consulted his log with visible confusion. "Herr Hauptmann, we have recorded 127 shots fired at confirmed British positions. Our spotters report 17 probable hits based on target disappearance after engagement. However," Krause hesitated, his weathered face showing the bewilderment of a veteran who'd survived 3 years on the Eastern Front and thought he'd seen everything. "However what?" Brenner snapped. "The British keep reappearing, same positions, different positions. Movement patterns make no tactical sense. We confirm a kill, target vanishes. Then, 20 minutes later, green berets appear 50 meters away. We are either facing a regiment-strength force in a sector where intelligence confirmed only platoon-level activity, or—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice what sounded insane. Brenner understood the impossibility. Wehrmacht doctrine was built on precise observation, accurate intelligence, and logical tactical responses. German mountain troops had mastered Norwegian terrain through methodical preparation, measured distances, prepared firing solutions, documented British patterns. Their success rate against Allied forces was exceptional, nearly 80% confirmed casualties based on observation protocols. But today, those protocols were producing contradictory data. German observers reported engaging British commandos wearing distinctive green berets, high-priority targets per standing orders. Shots were fired, targets disappeared, procedures indicated success, but the number of targets kept increasing beyond any reasonable reinforcement capacity. "Are we certain these are British commandos?" Brenner asked. "Could it be Norwegian resistance wearing captured equipment?" "Green berets are unmistakable, sir. Multiple observers confirm. And movement patterns suggest trained military, not partisans. Too coordinated, too deliberate. What Brenner couldn't accept, what German tactical doctrine didn't allow for, was that the British might deliberately create false targets on an industrial scale. Wehrmacht training emphasized direct engagement, overwhelming firepower, and technical superiority. The concept of systematic deception at squad level wasn't part of German operational thinking. Deception was strategic. Blitzkrieg feints, false radio traffic, dummy installations, not individual soldiers playing shell games with berets. German intelligence officer Lieutenant Peter Hoffmann arrived at the observation post at 15:20 hours, summoned by increasingly bizarre field reports. He studied the situation through his scope, timing British movements, counting appearances. After 30 minutes, he delivered his assessment. Unmöglich. The British would need 40 men minimum to maintain this level of activity across this frontage. Our reconnaissance confirms no more than 15 actually entered the sector. The mathematics don't reconcile. "Then what are we shooting at?" Brenner demanded. Hoffmann had no answer that fit German doctrine. He'd studied British tactics, competent but unimaginative, favoring frontal approaches and superior material. This was something else entirely. Creative, improvisational, almost theatrical in its execution. It violated the fundamental assumption that guided Wehrmacht operations, that British forces fought by the book, predictably, conventionally. At 16:05 hours, the situation escalated to absurdity. German observers simultaneously spotted green berets at 6 different positions spread across 300 meters of frontage. Basic military logic said this represented a company-level assault preparation. Brenner ordered concentrated fire, every available sniper engaging simultaneously to suppress what appeared to be a major British operation. For 90 seconds, the ridge erupted with rifle fire. 18 Wehrmacht snipers fired 34 rounds in a coordinated volley that should have devastated any actual British force. Positions were struck with overlapping fire, rocks exploded into fragments, the sound of impacts echoed across the fjord. Then silence. Smoke cleared. And slowly, incrementally, like a macabre puppet show, green berets began reappearing at different positions. 1 here, 2 there, 3 more along the southern approach. The same targets, apparently unharmed, resuming activity. "Das ist Wahnsinn," whispered Krauser, his expression showing genuine fear. "This is madness. We're shooting ghosts." The psychological effect on German forces was profound and unintended. Wehrmacht doctrine didn't accommodate inexplicable phenomena. Soldiers who'd fought across Russia, survived partisan warfare, endured Stalingrad. Men who knew death intimately were now facing something their training hadn't prepared them for, an enemy who seemingly couldn't be killed because he wasn't there. By 1700 hours, German fire had become erratic. Some snipers continued engaging, driven by training and pride. Others had stopped entirely, convinced they were wasting ammunition on hallucinations. Communication between observation posts revealed similar experiences across multiple sectors. British commandos appearing, being engaged, vanishing, reappearing. The 12th Mountain Division's after-action reports would later describe anomalous targeting conditions and unconfirmed phantom contacts. What German intelligence never grasped, what Brenner and Hoffmann couldn't conceptualize, was that the British had deliberately weaponized German efficiency. By creating targets that Wehrmacht training demanded must be engaged, then making those targets impossible to kill, the British had turned German tactical excellence into a liability. Every shot fired was ammunition wasted. Every position revealed was vulnerability created. Every moment spent engaging phantoms was time not spent on actual military objectives. At 17:45 hours, Brenner made the decision that confirmed British success. He ordered all forward observation posts to cease fire and withdraw to secondary positions, citing irregular engagement conditions requiring tactical reassessment. The official report would list ammunition expenditure, 152 rounds fired, with 0 confirmed casualties inflicted. That night, in Wehrmacht command posts across northern Norway, officers debated what had occurred. Some claimed British reinforcements, though reconnaissance confirmed none. Some suggested new camouflage technology, though that didn't explain targets appearing and disappearing. A few mentioned deception, but were dismissed because systematic tactical deception at patrol level was absurd, unmilitary, something only the British would attempt. They were right about that last part. It was absurd. It was unmilitary. And it had worked perfectly because the Germans couldn't adapt to an enemy who fought like theatrical stage managers rather than soldiers, who understood that sometimes winning meant not being where the enemy expected, no matter how many times they pulled the trigger. 21:30 hours, 15th November 1944. HMS Vigilant, briefing room. Colonel Hastings studied the after-action report with an expression that cycled between disbelief, amusement, and reluctant admiration. "Lieutenant Thornton, you're telling me that you defeated a Wehrmacht Mountain Division sniper network with newspaper-stuffed berets and some rope?" "In essence, sir, yes. Though I'd phrase it as exploited German tactical rigidity through systematic target deception, resulting in 0 friendly casualties, whilst revealing 9 enemy positions subsequently neutralized by counter-sniper operations." Thornton's exhaustion was evident. He'd been awake for 38 hours, but his eyes held quiet satisfaction. The statistics were undeniable. Operation Chameleon, as it was retroactively named, had achieved objectives that conventional approaches had failed to accomplish in 2 weeks of bloody attrition. British forces established forward observation posts in previously untenable positions. German sniper effectiveness dropped 73% in the sector over the following week. Wehrmacht ammunition expenditure increased, whilst casualties inflicted decreased. Most significantly, British Commando morale, previously devastated by losses, rebounded as word spread that someone had finally beaten the German snipers at their own game. The operational debriefing revealed insights that extended beyond immediate tactical success. Intelligence officers analyzed German radio intercepts from 13 to 14 November. Translated Wehrmacht field reports, and interviewed Norwegian resistance contacts with connections to German logistics. The picture that emerged was of systematic German confusion. Supply officers questioned by sudden ammunition requests. Commanders demanded explanations for decreased effectiveness. Intelligence personnel attempted to reconcile contradictory observation reports. Captain Halloran, the intelligence officer, presented his assessment. "The Germans have built their Norwegian defensive operations around doctrine that emphasizes prepared positions, measured responses, and technical superiority. Thornton's approach violated their fundamental assumptions about how warfare operates. They couldn't adapt because adaptation would require acknowledging that British forces fought creatively rather than conventionally, and that admission contradicts Wehrmacht's self-perception of technical and tactical superiority. The immediate military impact was measurable. Over the following 3 weeks, similar deception operations were conducted across 30 assault units' operational area. The methods evolved. Decoys became more sophisticated, incorporating heated elements that appeared on German thermal scopes. Movement patterns became randomized to prevent pattern recognition. British forces even added sound effects, recorded voices played from concealed speakers, creating acoustic signatures of military activity in empty positions. German response was slow and ineffective. Wehrmacht issued directives about British deception tactics in late November, but by then the psychological damage was done. German snipers, previously confident in their superiority, became hesitant. Every target might be real or might be another beret on a stick. Hesitation meant slower engagement times, reduced effectiveness, and lost tactical advantage. By December 1944, when Wehrmacht forces completed their withdrawal from northern Norway, British casualty rates in Commando operations had dropped 41% compared to October-November baseline. This wasn't solely attributable to Operation Chameleon, but post-war analysis credited the psychological impact as significant. German forces expecting deception, becoming cautious, losing initiative. The long-term legacy extended beyond tactical innovation. Thornton's approach became a case study at British Commando training facilities, not for the specific technique, which was situation-specific, but for the underlying principle. Asymmetric warfare succeeds when it exploits enemy assumptions rather than confronts enemy strengths. The operation validated the British talent for improvisation under pressure, the willingness to attempt ridiculous solutions when conventional methods failed. Thornton himself received commendation, but no public recognition. The operation remained classified until 1978, when Norwegian military historians researching Wehrmacht records discovered references to Phantom Regiment incidents and traced them back to British archives. By then, Thornton had returned to Sheffield, resumed his engineering career, and rarely spoke about the war, except to occasionally mention that sometimes the simplest ideas work precisely because they're too stupid to anticipate. Sergeant Davies was awarded the Military Medal for his role coordinating the operation under fire. He returned to Northumberland, became a schoolteacher, and told his students that the most important lesson he'd learned in war was that courage sometimes means being willing to look foolish if it saves lives. The commandos who executed the Beret ballet dispersed to post-war lives. Foster returned to London and drove buses for 30 years. Hughes became a wireless operator for the BBC. McGregor, despite frostbite injuries, worked in Glasgow shipyards until retirement. None sought recognition. In the British tradition of understated heroism, they considered the operation a bit of clever dodging rather than a revolutionary tactical innovation. The broader historical significance emerged only through comparative analysis. Military historians noted that whilst American forces in the Pacific developed sophisticated deception operations and Soviet forces mastered Maskirovka on the Eastern Front, the British specialized in small-scale, squad-level improvisations. Ordinary soldiers solving problems creatively because resources were limited and lives were precious. The Beret operation exemplified this distinctly British approach to warfare. Make do with what's available. Don't wait for official approval. Try something absurd if it might work, and never admit how terrified you were whilst doing it. When archives were declassified, German veterans were interviewed about the phantom incidents. Most remembered confusion, some admitted frustration, few acknowledged being systematically deceived. Hauptmann Brenner, located in Bavaria, retired, willing to discuss the war, provided perhaps the most honest assessment. We were trained to fight enemies who behaved logically, who followed doctrine, who could be predicted. The British didn't fight logically that day. They fought like, I don't know the English word, like theatre actors, and we shot at the performance whilst the real actors watched from safety. It was humiliating, but also, I admit now, brilliant. The final accounting revealed that Operation Chameleon saved an estimated 30 to 40 British lives through direct reduction in casualties and indirectly through changed German tactics. The cost, approximately $50 in materials, berets, wood, rope, newspaper, and the willingness of 12 exhausted commandos to spend a day playing the most dangerous shell game in history. As Thornton wrote in his declassified after-action report's final paragraph, war is often won not by superior force, but by superior thinking. Today, we prove that sometimes superior thinking means being willing to look absolutely ridiculous whilst convincing the enemy to shoot at hats. I respectfully submit that this is both absurd and entirely consistent with the British character. We prefer to win through cleverness rather than strength, and will endure any indignity if it means fewer funerals. The Germans shot at empty positions. We kept our men alive. By any measure that matters, we won. And if this story of British ingenuity, resilience, and creative defiance under fire resonated with you, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What other untold stories from the Second World War would you like to explore? What moments of British courage and innovation deserve recognition? Join our community of history enthusiasts who believe that the past isn't just dates and battles, it's human stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when everything was at stake. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and let's keep these remarkable stories alive together.